The sound of galloping hooves and the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the rolling plains as Nora Barrett pressed her face against the stage coach window, catching her first glimpse of Independence, Missouri, in 1849. The journey west had been grueling, but nothing compared to what awaited her. A marriage arranged by her father to a man twice her age, a wealthy merchant named Victor Holloway, who needed a young wife to manage his household and bear his children. At 18, Nora's dreams of love had been traded for her family's financial security, a transaction as cold as the wedding band that would soon encircle her finger. First time to Independence, miss. The elderly woman beside her smiled kindly, her weathered face a map of lines that spoke of a lifetime on the frontier. Yes, Nora replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. I'm to be married next week. You don't sound particularly enthused, the woman observed, her eyes twinkling with understanding. Nora forced a smile. It's just the journey. I'm quite tired. As the stagecoach rolled into town, Independence revealed itself as a bustling gateway to the western frontier. Merchants hawked supplies to wagon trains preparing for the Oregon Trail, cowboys herded cattle through dusty streets, and saloons overflowed with the raucous laughter of men seeking respite from the hardships of frontier life. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and as Nora descended, her gaze fell upon a man leaning against a hitching post across the street. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair peeking from beneath a well-worn Stetson, he cut an imposing figure among the townsfolk. When their eyes met briefly, something electric passed between them, a connection so tangible it made her breath catch. "Miss Barrett." A nasal voice broke the moment. Victor Holloway stood before her, his gray-streaked hair slicked back beneath an expensive hat, his waistcoat straining against a prosperous belly. At 45, his face bore the marks of a man who rarely smiled and often frowned. "Welcome to Independence. I trust your journey was tolerable." "Yes, Mr. Holloway, thank you for arranging it." Nora curtsied slightly, already feeling the weight of her future settle upon her shoulders. "Excellent, my carriage awaits." He gestured without offering to take her bags, which were being unloaded by the stagecoach driver. As Victor turned to speak with the driver about her trunks, Nora felt eyes upon her again. The cowboy still watched from across the street, his expression unreadable. A voice called out, "Reese." And he turned away, mounting a magnificent chestnut stallion with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. Reese Irwin. She didn't know his name then, but it would soon become the most important name in her world. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of introductions and preparations. Victor's home, a grand two-story building on the outskirts of town, was as cold and imposing as the man himself. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, guided Nora through the rigid routines of the household with military precision, while Victor remained absent most days, attending to his mercantile business. "Mr. Holloway expects dinner at precisely 6 o'clock, Mrs. Finch explained. "He retires to his study afterward and is not to be disturbed unless absolutely necessary." "And where shall I spend my evenings?" Nora inquired, trying to envision her life in this mausoleum of a home. "Most mistresses occupy themselves with needlework or reading in the parlor," the older woman replied without emotion. "Mr. Holloway appreciates a quiet household." On the eve of her wedding, Nora escaped to the garden, desperate for fresh air and solitude. The weight of her impending nuptials pressed down upon her chest until she could scarcely breathe. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. She had made her peace with this arrangement, or so she told herself. "Miss Barrett." The deep voice startled her. Turning, she found herself face to face with the cowboy from the street. Up close, his eyes were the color of a summer sky, creased at the corners from years squinting into the sun. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Small town," he replied with a hint of a smile. "Word travels fast when Victor Holloway imports a bride from back east." The bluntness of his statement caused her cheeks to flush. "I should return inside. Wait." He didn't reach for her, yet she felt compelled to stop. "I'm Reese Irwin. I work at the Double Diamond Ranch just outside town." He removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair. "I just wanted to wish you happiness." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin." "Reese," he corrected, then hesitated before continuing. "They say Holloway's a hard man." "It's not your concern," she replied, though without heat. "No, it isn't." He replaced his hat. "But if you ever need anything at all, folks at the Silverton Saloon know how to find me." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving Nora with the strangest feeling that she'd just encountered a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. The wedding was a perfunctory affair. Victor had invited the town's prominent citizens not out of any desire to celebrate, but to showcase his acquisition of a young, well-bred wife. Nora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by a local seamstress, and spoke her vows in a clear voice that belied the turmoil within. Throughout the ceremony, she scanned the gathered faces, half hoping to see a particular pair of blue eyes, but Reese Irwin was not among the guests. That night, Victor claimed his conjugal rights with the same efficiency he approached his business dealings, methodically and without passion. Nora endured, focusing on a crack in the ceiling plaster, counting the seconds until it was over. When he finished and rolled away, she felt nothing but relief. "You'll learn to perform your duties better with time," he said before blowing out the lamp, leaving her in darkness with tears silently tracking down her temples into her hair. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Nora settled into her role as Mrs. Holloway, managing the household with competence if not enthusiasm. Victor's demands were predictable. Meals on time, the house kept immaculate, and herself available whenever he desired her company, which was primarily at social functions where he could parade her before his business associates or in their bedchamber at night. In between these obligations, Nora carved out small freedoms. She convinced Victor to allow her a weekly trip to town for supplies, arguing that it was beneath his dignity for his wife to send servants on such errands. These excursions became her lifeline, opportunities to breathe freely outside the suffocating confines of her marriage. It was during one such trip, nearly 6 months after her arrival in Independence, that she encountered Reese Irwin again. She was selecting fabric at the general store when a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the window, she saw several cowboys on horseback, Reese among them, escorting a wagon loaded with supplies. As if sensing her gaze, he looked toward the store. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something softer. He tipped his hat in greeting, a gesture so small yet so genuine that it warmed her more than any of Victor's expensive gifts ever had. Later, as she left the store with her purchases, he appeared beside her, leading his horse by the reins. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice low, "let me help you with those packages." "I couldn't possibly," she began, but he was already taking the parcels from her arms. "Where's your carriage?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "I walk on pleasant days. The exercise is good for me." What she didn't say was that these walks were precious moments of solitude. "Your husband doesn't mind you walking alone?" The question held no judgment, only curiosity. "What Mr. Holloway doesn't know doesn't concern him," she replied, then bit her lip, surprised by her own candor. Reese studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "How are you finding Independence?" "It's different from Boston." "That's not what I asked." The directness of his gaze made prevarication impossible. "It's lonely," she admitted, the truth escaping before she could contain it. His eyes softened with understanding. "The West can be a harsh place, especially for a woman alone." "I'm not alone." "I have a husband," she reminded him, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "There are different kinds of alone, Mrs. Holloway." They walked in silence until they reached the edge of town where her path would take her toward Victor's estate. Reese handed back her packages, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Irwin." "Reese," he corrected again, a small smile playing at his lips. And it was my pleasure, Nora. The sound of her given name on his lips sent a thrill through her that she immediately tried to suppress. I should go. Of course. He stepped back, but his eyes held hers. I meant what I said before. If you need anything, the Silverton Saloon knows how to find you, she finished for him, returning his smile before turning away. As she walked home, Nora found herself wondering what it would be like to be married to a man like Reese Irwin, someone who looked at her as if she were a person rather than a possession, who spoke to her as an equal rather than a subordinate. The thought was dangerous, and she banished it quickly, focusing instead on what excuse she would give Victor for her delayed return. The seasons changed, and with them, Nora's resignation hardened into quiet desperation. Victor's business prospered, requiring more of his attention and less of hers, for which she was grateful. Yet his absences only highlighted the emptiness of her existence. She took to writing lengthy letters to her sister back in Boston, carefully edited versions of her life that omitted the cold bed and colder heart of her husband. In the spring of 1850, Victor announced his intention to expand his business interests to include a stage line between Independence and Santa Fe. This venture would require extensive travel on his part. You will, of course, remain here to manage the household, he informed her over dinner. Mrs. Finch will continue as housekeeper, and I've arranged for Mr. Peterson, my assistant manager, to check on you regularly. How long will you be gone? Nora asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. 3 months, possibly 4. These negotiations require a personal touch. Victor dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. I expect you to maintain the standards of this house in my absence. Your behavior reflects upon me, Nora. Of course, Victor. She lowered her eyes appropriately, concealing the spark of relief his announcement had kindled. 4 months of freedom, limited though it might be, seemed like a gift from Providence. The day of Victor's departure arrived with a spring thunderstorm that matched Nora's tumultuous emotions. As she stood on the porch watching his carriage disappear down the rain-soaked drive, she felt simultaneously liberated and terrified. For the first time since her marriage, she was effectively her own mistress, yet the prospect of such autonomy after months of rigid control was almost overwhelming. That night, alone in the bed she usually shared with Victor, Nora slept better than she had in months. Her weekly trips to town became more frequent. Without Victor to question her movements, she found excuses to visit Independence nearly every day. She befriended the milliner's assistant, a lively young woman named Sarah who introduced her to other women her age. She volunteered at the small schoolhouse, reading to the children and helping them with their letters. For the first time since arriving in Missouri, Nora began to feel connected to something beyond the walls of her gilded cage. It was inevitable that these excursions would lead to more encounters with Reese Irwin. Sometimes she spotted him across the street or riding through town with other cowboys. Occasionally, they exchanged pleasantries when their paths crossed directly. Each brief interaction left her more intrigued by the quiet, intense man who seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade. One afternoon, a sudden downpour caught Nora by surprise as she left the general store. She hurried to seek shelter beneath the overhang of the nearest building, the Silverton Saloon. Hesitating at the entrance, she debated the propriety of a woman alone entering such an establishment. Mrs. Holloway, Reese's voice came from behind her. He approached, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. You're getting soaked. Come inside. I couldn't possibly. It's the middle of the afternoon. The place is nearly empty and I know the owner. His hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching. Unless you'd prefer pneumonia. The twinkle in his eye made her laugh despite herself. Lead the way, Mr. Irwin. Inside, the saloon was indeed quiet, with only a few patrons nursing drinks in the corners. A burly man behind the bar raised an eyebrow at Nora's entrance, but nodded respectfully when Reese guided her to a table far from the windows. Frank, Reese called, some hot coffee for the lady, if you please. The barkeep nodded and disappeared into a back room. "You're very comfortable giving orders here," Nora observed, removing her damp gloves. "Frank and I go back a ways," Reese replied. "We came west together after the Mexican War. You were a soldier, Texas Mounted Volunteers." A shadow crossed his face. "Saw things no man should see, did things I'd rather forget. After it was over, neither of us wanted to go back east." Nora studied him with new understanding. "So you became a cowboy." "I was always good with horses," he shrugged, his modesty genuine. The double diamond needed men who could handle themselves in rough country. It seemed a good fit. Frank returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a knowing look that Reese pointedly ignored. "And what about you, Mrs. Holloway?" Reese asked after the barkeep retreated. "What brought a Boston lady to the Missouri frontier?" Nora cradled her mug, welcoming its warmth. "My father lost his shipping business in the Panic of '37. He never quite recovered financially. When Victor Holloway expressed interest in a correspondence courtship, my parents saw it as..." She hesitated. "A business opportunity," Reese suggested quietly. "An advantageous match," she corrected, though his assessment wasn't wrong. Victor offered financial security and a respectable position, but not love. The bluntness of his statement should have offended her, but instead it loosened something tight within her chest. "Love is a luxury few can afford, Mr. Irwin." "Reese," he reminded her gently. Their eyes met over the rim of her coffee cup, and for a moment, Nora allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she had met this man before Victor, before duty and desperation had sealed her fate. "Reese," she conceded, his name feeling dangerously right on her lips. The rain continued to drum against the saloon's roof, creating a cocoon of intimacy around their table. They talked for nearly an hour about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. Reese spoke of his family's farm in Pennsylvania, of his mother's death when he was 12, of his father's subsequent decline into drink and debt. Nora shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her love of music and art, her secret ambition to one day see the great European capitals. "You still could, you know," Reese said. "You're young yet." "I'm a married woman," she reminded him, reality crashing back. "My traveling days are over before they began." Something flickered in his eyes, determination, perhaps, or resolve. "The future isn't set in stone, Nora." The use of her given name without her permission should have shocked her, but instead it felt like a gift. Before she could respond, however, the saloon door swung open, admitting Mr. Peterson, Victor's assistant manager. "Mrs. Holloway," he exclaimed, shock evident in his voice. "What on earth are you doing in such an establishment?" Nora rose quickly, her cheeks flushing. "The rain, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Irwin was kind enough to offer shelter until it passed." Peterson's eyes darted between Nora and Reese, suspicion evident. "I see. Well, the rain has stopped and I have the carriage outside. Allow me to escort you home." "Of course." Nora gathered her things, avoiding Reese's gaze. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Irwin." Reese stood as well, his posture tense. "My pleasure, Mrs. Holloway. Take care on the road home." As Peterson ushered her out, Nora risked one glance back. Reese watched her go, his expression unreadable, but the intensity of his gaze followed her into the street. The ride home was filled with Peterson's thinly veiled lectures about propriety and a wife's duty to her husband's reputation. Nora endured it silently, knowing that her afternoon with Reese would undoubtedly reach Victor's ears upon his return. The knowledge should have frightened her, yet all she could think about was the way Reese's eyes crinkled when he smiled, and how, for a few precious hours, she had felt truly seen for the first time since arriving in Independence. Peterson made good on his unspoken threat. 2 days after her encounter with Reese at the saloon, Nora received a tersely worded letter from Victor, expressing his profound disappointment in her judgment and instructing her to remain at home except for Sunday church services until his return. Peterson, he informed her, would deliver any necessary supplies to the house. The restriction chafed, but Nora found small rebellions where she could. She took long walks on the property, venturing farther from the house than she ever had before. She discovered a small stream that cut through the western edge of Victor's land, with a fallen log that made a perfect reading spot. Here, surrounded by wildflowers and the gentle murmur of flowing water, she could pretend she was free. It was at this stream, 3 weeks after her encounter at the saloon, that she saw Reese again. She was so absorbed in her book, a collection of Wordsworth's poetry that she'd brought from Boston, that she didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were quite close. Looking up, she found Reese dismounting from his stallion, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Nora," he said, foregoing formality entirely, "I've been worried about you." She stood quickly, marking her place in the book. "How did you find me?" "I've ridden past the Holloway property every day for weeks, hoping to catch sight of you." He approached cautiously, as one might a skittish deer. "When I saw a flash of blue by the stream, I took a chance." "You shouldn't be here," she said, even as her heart raced at his presence. "This is my husband's land. I know," his jaw tightened. "I also know he's had you virtually imprisoned since Peterson saw us at the saloon." Nora blinked in surprise. "How could you know that?" "Sarah from the millinery told me. She's been concerned about you two." He took another step closer. "Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid her. For months she had maintained her composure, playing the role of contented wife while emptiness gnawed at her core. Now, faced with Reese's earnest inquiry, the facade began to crack. She swallowed hard, fighting tears. "I'm surviving." "That's not living, Nora." He closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. "You deserve more than survival." "It doesn't matter what I deserve," she whispered. "This is my life now. It doesn't have to be." The intensity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze directly. "You could leave." The suggestion hung in the air between them, dangerous and tempting. "And go where? Do what? I have no money of my own, no skills to speak of. You could go anywhere, do anything." His hand reached for hers, hesitated, then gently took it. The contact sent warmth spiraling up her arm. "I'd help you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you risk everything for a woman you barely know?" Reese's expression softened, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Because from the moment I saw you step down from that stagecoach, I knew you were someone special. Because every time we've spoken, I've seen the real you fighting to break free. Because I can't bear the thought of that light inside you being extinguished by a man who sees you as property rather than a person." His words touched something deep within her, a longing she'd buried beneath duty and resignation. "Reese," the sound of voices calling her name interrupted whatever she might have said. Mrs. Finch and one of the stable hands were searching for her, their calls growing closer. "I have to go," she whispered urgently, pulling her hand from his. "If they find you here, meet me again," he said quickly. "Tomorrow, same time. I can't promise, try." His eyes held hers, imploring, "Please." She nodded once before hurrying away, calling out to Mrs. Finch that she was coming. When she glanced back, Reese and his horse had already disappeared among the trees. That night, Nora lay awake, Reese's words echoing in her mind. You could leave. The possibility she had never allowed herself to consider now took root, growing stronger with each passing hour. What would it mean to reclaim her life? To seek happiness rather than mere security? The questions were both terrifying and exhilarating. True to her word, she returned to the stream the following afternoon, her heart pounding as she waited. When Reese appeared, leading his horse through the trees, the smile that bloomed on her face surprised even herself. "You came," he said, his relief evident. "I shouldn't have," she admitted, "but I couldn't stay away." They sat on the fallen log, maintaining a respectable distance between them, while their conversation ventured into decidedly disrespectable territory. Reese spoke of friends who had headed to California, of the opportunities opening up in the newly formed territories, of places where a woman might start fresh without the shadow of a loveless marriage hanging over her. "Victor would find me," Nora argued. His pride wouldn't allow his wife to simply disappear. Not if he believed you were dead, Reese said quietly. The suggestion shocked her. What are you saying? The spring floods are coming. The Missouri River will rise, carrying debris downstream. If a woman's cloak and some personal effects were found along the banks. He left the implication hanging. You want me to fake my own death? The audacity of the plan left her breathless. I want you to be free. His hand found hers again, his grip firm and warm. Think about it, Nora. No more living under his thumb, no more being a bird in a gilded cage. You could reinvent yourself anywhere west of here. And you, she asked, her voice barely audible. Where would you be in this plan? His eyes met hers, honest and direct. Wherever you wanted me to be. Beside you if you'll have me, or simply helping you reach safety if you prefer. I'm not proposing to replace one cage with another. The offer was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a choice freely given, without obligation or expectation. It made Victor's calculated courtship seem even colder by comparison. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Victor returns in 3 weeks, yes, she nodded. Then you have 3 weeks to decide. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it. He stood, preparing to leave. Same time tomorrow. Despite every rational argument against it, Nora found herself nodding. Same time tomorrow. Their clandestine meetings continued daily, always at the stream, always with Reese approaching from beyond Victor's property to avoid detection. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: his work at the ranch, her childhood in Boston, books they'd both read, places they dreamed of seeing. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow or identifying birds that swooped overhead. As the days passed, Nora's resistance to Reese's plan began to weaken. The prospect of freedom, true freedom to determine her own destiny, was intoxicating. Yet she hesitated, constrained by a lifetime of teaching about duty and propriety. What holds you back? Reese asked one afternoon, a week before Victor's expected return. Is it fear of the unknown? Partly, she admitted. But also, guilt, I suppose. I made vows, Reese, before God and witnesses. Vows based on false pretenses, he countered gently. Victor presented himself as a benefactor, a protector. Has he protected your happiness? Your spirit? She couldn't answer, knowing the truth would only strengthen his argument. There's something else too, isn't there? He pressed, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. Nora sighed, plucking a wildflower from beside the log. If I leave, especially in the manner you suggest, I can never contact my family again. My sister, my parents, they would believe me dead. Reese was silent for a long moment, considering. What if there was a way to let them know you're alive without revealing your whereabouts to Victor? How? A trusted intermediary. Someone who could deliver a letter to your family after sufficient time has passed, explaining that you're safe but cannot return. He took her hand, his touch now familiar and comforting. Your sister, at least, might understand. Wouldn't she want your happiness above all? The thought of Emily receiving such a letter, of the relief and confusion it would cause, brought fresh tears to Nora's eyes. She might. She's always been my fiercest defender. Then write to her. Explain everything. I know someone traveling east next month who could deliver it personally, ensuring it doesn't pass through hands that might betray you. The possibility ignited a spark of hope. If Emily knew she was alive and well, perhaps the guilt of her deception would be easier to bear. And what of us, Reese? She asked, finally giving voice to the question that had hovered between them for weeks. If I choose this path, what becomes of us? His expression softened, eyes filled with an emotion he had carefully contained until now. Whatever you want us to be, Nora. I won't deny my feelings for you, they've grown stronger every day, but your freedom must come first. If friendship is all you desire, then friendship you shall have. And if I desire more? The boldness of her question surprised her, yet she didn't retract it. Reese's hand moved to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Then I would count myself the most fortunate man on the frontier and spend every day trying to be worthy of your choice. Their faces were close now, breath mingling in the narrow space between them. Nora knew she stood at a precipice. One step would irrevocably alter her path. For a moment, duty and desire waged their final battle within her heart. Desire won. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as years of suppressed emotion found release. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as she wound her hands into his hair, dislodging his hat. When they finally parted, both breathless, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day we met," he confessed. "So have I," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. Even in those first moments outside the stagecoach, something within her had recognized something within him, a recognition her conscious mind had been too afraid to acknowledge. "Does this mean you've decided?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. Nora took a deep breath, sensing the weight of the moment. "Yes, I want to be free, Reese. Free to live, free to love, free to choose my own path with you beside me if you'll still have me." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. "I would follow you to the ends of the earth." Nora Barrett. They spent the next week planning meticulously. Reese arranged for a friend, a trustworthy freighter named Samuel, who regularly traveled between Independence and St. Louis, to help transport Nora and a few essential belongings to a small settlement in the Kansas Territory where Reese had connections. From there, they would travel to California, where the gold rush had created boomtowns full of newcomers, places where a couple could establish themselves without questions about their past. Nora carefully selected the few possessions she would take: her mother's locket, a small collection of books, practical clothing that wouldn't attract attention. She wrote 2 letters, one to Emily explaining everything and begging her understanding, and another to be left behind, a deliberately ambiguous note that could be interpreted as the writing of a despondent woman contemplating a tragic end. The evening before their plan was to be executed, Nora stood in her bedroom at Victor's house for what she knew would be the last time. She had lived there for nearly a year, yet nothing about the space reflected her personality or preferences. It was as if she had been a ghost even while living there, leaving no impression on her surroundings. A commotion downstairs pulled her from her reflections. Male voices, raised in anger, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Heart racing, Nora hurried to the landing, peering over the banister to see Peterson and 2 other men from town confronting a battered and bloodied Reese in the foyer. "Bring him in here," Peterson commanded, gesturing toward Victor's study. "Mrs. Holloway, come down at once." Frozen with horror, Nora descended the stairs on trembling legs. Reese's eyes met hers, his expression a mixture of apology and determination despite the blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. Peterson's smile was cold. "One of the stable hands reported seeing a stranger near the stream on our property. We've been watching, Mrs. Holloway, and today we caught this man waiting there." He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket, the letter she had written to Emily. "And we found this on his person. Care to explain why you're planning to abandon your husband and fake your own death?" The blood drained from Nora's face. Everything was unraveling, their careful plans, their chance at happiness all destroyed in an instant. "Mrs. Holloway had nothing to do with this," Reese spoke up, his voice strong despite his injuries. "I forced her to write that letter, threatened her if she didn't cooperate." "A gallant lie, Mr. Irwin, but the stable hand saw Mrs. Holloway meeting you willingly on multiple occasions." Peterson's gaze shifted to Nora, contempt evident in his expression. "Mr. Holloway has been telegraphed. He's cutting his trip short and will return tomorrow evening. Until then, you will remain in your room under guard." "And what of Mr. Irwin?" Nora asked, unable to tear her gaze from Reese's battered face. "Mr. Irwin will be the guest of our town marshal until Mr. Holloway decides how to proceed." Peterson nodded to his companions, who roughly hauled Reese to his feet. I believe the charge of attempting to abduct a married woman should suffice for now. I wasn't abducting anyone, Reese struggled against his captors. Nora was leaving of her own free will. Nora, Peterson raised an eyebrow at the familiar address. Well, that certainly clarifies the nature of your relationship. He turned to Nora, his expression glacial. To your room, Mrs. Holloway, now. As the men dragged Reese toward the door, his eyes found hers one last time. Stay strong, he mouthed silently before they pulled him outside. Nora spent a sleepless night pacing her room, her mind racing through possible scenarios, each more desperate than the last. By morning, she had reached a decision. When Mrs. Finch brought breakfast, Nora appeared contrite and subdued. Mrs. Finch, I've behaved foolishly, she said, eyes downcast. I was led astray by romantic notions unworthy of Mr. Holloway's wife. I wish to make amends when he returns. The housekeeper studied her suspiciously. Mr. Peterson said you were planning to run away. A momentary madness, Nora insisted. I see clearly now. But I would like to look my best when my husband returns. Would you help me prepare a bath this afternoon? Somewhat mollified by Nora's apparent repentance, Mrs. Finch nodded. I'll have the water brought up after lunch. The hours crawled by as Nora waited, her nerves taut as violin strings. When Mrs. Finch finally announced her bath was ready, she thanked the older woman with convincing gratitude. I'd like some privacy, if you don't mind, she requested. I have much to contemplate before Mr. Holloway's return. Mrs. Finch hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. The moment the door closed, Nora sprang into action. She quickly changed into the simplest dress she owned, added a shawl for warmth, and gathered the small bundle of possessions she had prepared earlier. From beneath the mattress, she retrieved the money she had gradually secreted away from her household allowance over the past months. Not much, but enough for immediate needs. The window opened onto a section of sloped roof over the kitchen. Nora had never considered herself particularly athletic, but desperation lent her agility as she eased herself onto the shingles and carefully made her way to the edge where a sturdy oak branch extended invitingly close. The climb down was terrifying but brief. Once on solid ground, Nora pressed herself against the trunk, scanning for any sign of Peterson or the guards. Seeing none, she slipped around the side of the house and darted toward the tree line, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. By some miracle, she reached the cover of the woods undetected. From there, she made her way to the stream and followed it west, away from town, remembering Reese's description of a place where the Double Diamond Ranch's property bordered Victor's land. If she could reach the ranch, perhaps someone there would help her, if not for her sake, then for Reese's. The sun was beginning to set when exhaustion forced Nora to rest. She had been walking for hours, her city-bred feet unused to such terrain. Settling beneath a large cottonwood tree, she allowed herself a small sip from the canteen she'd filled before leaving and a moment to assess her situation. Reese was imprisoned. Their plan had failed. Victor would return tonight, furious and vindictive. She was alone in unfamiliar wilderness with limited supplies and no clear path forward. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her, then she remembered Reese's words, "Stay strong." He had faith in her resilience even now. She wouldn't let that faith be misplaced. As twilight deepened, Nora heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Ducking lower into the underbrush, she held her breath as a rider approached along the stream bank. The figure stopped nearly opposite her hiding place, dismounting to let the horse drink from the stream. In the fading light, Nora recognized the Double Diamond brand on the horse's flank. Taking a chance, she emerged cautiously from concealment. "Hello," she called softly. The rider spun around, hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Who's there?" "My name is Nora Holloway," she said, stepping forward where he could see her. "I'm looking for help. Reese Irwin works at your ranch and he's in trouble." The cowboy, young, barely out of his teens, eyed her warily. "What kind of trouble?" "He's been arrested for trying to help me leave my husband." The baldness of her statement seemed to surprise the young man. "Please, I need to speak with someone at the ranch who might help him." After a moment's consideration, the cowboy nodded. "Name's Billy. I work with Reese." "Climb up behind me, and I'll take you to the foreman. He'll know what to do." The Double Diamond Ranch house was a sprawling, practical structure without the pretensions of Victor's home. Light spilled from its windows as Billy led Nora inside, where a group of men sat around a large table, deep in discussion. They fell silent as she entered. "Found her by the creek," Billy explained. "Says she's Holloway's wife and Reese is in jail for helping her run off." A grizzled older man with silver-streaked hair and a weathered face rose from the head of the table. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm Daniel Morgan, foreman of the Double Diamond. Reese Irwin is one of my best men." His penetrating gaze seemed to assess her worth in a glance. "Why don't you tell us exactly what happened?" Nora did, omitting nothing. She described her loveless marriage, her meetings with Reese, their plan to leave together, and its disastrous conclusion. As she spoke, she noticed the men exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something like respect. "So you escaped," Morgan said when she finished. "Why come here instead of just running?" "Because I won't leave without Reese," she replied simply. "He risked everything for me. I won't abandon him now." Morgan studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Holloway's not a man to cross lightly. He has influence in town, connections with the territorial authorities. Breaking Reese out of jail could put everyone involved on the wrong side of the law." "I understand," Nora said, her heart sinking. "I shouldn't have asked. I didn't say we wouldn't do it," Morgan interrupted, a slow smile spreading across his weathered features. "Just that we need to be smart about it. Reese Irwin has saved every man at this table at least once in one way or another. We take care of our own." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "What can I do to help?" "For now, rest. You look dead on your feet." Morgan gestured to a young cowboy. "Tom, show Mrs. Holloway to the guest room. The rest of you gather round. We've got planning to do." As Tom led her upstairs, Nora heard Morgan behind her. "And someone ride into town. I want to know exactly where they're keeping Reese and how many men are guarding him." For the second night in a row, sleep eluded Nora, but this time anticipation rather than dread kept her awake. By morning, Morgan and his men had formulated a plan that was as audacious as it was clever. "Holloway returned late last night," reported a cowboy who'd ridden into town at first light. "Word is he's beside himself with rage. He's calling for Reese to be charged with kidnapping and worse." "Then we move tonight," Morgan decided. "Mrs. Holloway, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we do this, there's no turning back. You'll never be able to return to your old life." Nora's resolve was unwavering. "I made my decision when I climbed out that window, Mr. Morgan. I won't change it now." As dusk fell, Nora found herself dressed in men's clothing trousers, a loose shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face riding beside Morgan and 6 of his most trusted cowboys toward independence. The plan was simple in concept, though dangerous in execution. Create a diversion on the opposite side of town, draw the marshal and his deputies away from the jail, and in the confusion, free Reese. "Remember," Morgan told her as they approached the outskirts of town, "stay with Billy and do exactly as he says. If anything goes wrong, he'll get you to safety." Billy, the young cowboy who had found her by the stream, nodded solemnly beside her. Despite his youth, his eyes held a steady determination that reassured her. They split into 3 groups as they entered Independence, taking different routes to avoid attracting attention. Nora and Billy made their way through back alleys toward the jailhouse, a small brick building adjacent to the marshal's office. They positioned themselves in the shadows of a nearby livery stable, watching as 2 of the Double Diamond men casually entered the saloon across the street. Minutes later, the sound of breaking glass and raised voices erupted from the saloon, quickly escalating into what sounded like a full-scale brawl. The marshal and 1 deputy rushed from the office toward the disturbance, leaving a single guard with the prisoners. "That's our cue," Billy whispered, leading Nora toward the rear of the jailhouse where Morgan waited with 2 horses. The back door of the jail was locked, but Morgan made quick work of it with tools Nora didn't recognize. Inside, they found a startled deputy reaching for his gun. Before he could draw, Morgan's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him unconscious to the floor. "Keys," Morgan muttered, searching the fallen man. Finding them in his vest pocket, he moved quickly to the cells at the back of the room. Reese was in the last cell, his face more bruised than when Nora had last seen him, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Nora, how no time for explanations," Morgan interrupted, unlocking the cell door. "We need to move now." Reese emerged, embracing Nora briefly before Morgan pressed a gun into his hand. "2 horses out back. Head west, stick to the plan we discussed for fugitives. There's supplies in the saddlebags enough to get you to Fort Riley. My cousin Thomas runs a trading post there. He'll help you get farther west." "Daniel, I can't thank you enough," Reese began, but Morgan cut him off with a rough embrace. "Consider it payment for pulling me out of that blizzard 3 winters back. Now go, before they realize this whole ruckus is a distraction." Outside, Reese and Nora mounted quickly, Reese wincing slightly from his injuries but managing nonetheless. As they prepared to ride out, Morgan grasped Reese's arm one last time. "Take care of her, son, and take care of yourself. Right when you're settled somewhere safe." With a final nod of gratitude, Reese urged his horse forward, Nora following close behind. They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and independence before the alarm could be raised. It was near dawn when they finally stopped to rest the horses by a small creek. Dismounting, Reese immediately pulled Nora into his arms, holding her as if he feared she might disappear. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured against her hair. "When Peterson caught me at the stream, I was certain it was over." "I couldn't leave you there," Nora said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Not after everything you risked for me." He pulled back slightly, studying her face in the growing light. "Are you sure about this, Nora? We're fugitives now, the life ahead won't be easy." She reached up to touch his bruised cheek gently. "I've never been more certain of anything. Whatever hardships come, we'll face them together." The kiss they shared then was a promise of loyalty, of partnership, of a love freely chosen rather than dictated by circumstance or convention. Their journey west was arduous, but not without its joys. They traveled by night when possible, avoiding main roads and settlements where news of their escape might have preceded them. During the days, they camped in secluded spots, learning about each other in ways their clandestine meetings at the stream had never allowed. Nora discovered that Reese sang softly to himself when he thought no one was listening, that he could identify nearly every bird they encountered, that he carried a small carved wooden horse his grandfather had made him as a child. Reese learned that Nora could recite Shakespeare from memory, that she loved thunderstorms despite fearing them, that she had always secretly wanted to learn to shoot. "No time like the present," he said one afternoon, setting up empty cans on a fallen log and showing her how to hold his revolver. Her first attempts missed wildly, but by the 10th try she hit her target, her triumphant whoop echoing through the trees. When they reached Fort Riley, Morgan's cousin Thomas welcomed them without questions, providing fresh horses and additional supplies for the next leg of their journey. From him, they learned that Victor Holloway had indeed reported his wife kidnapped and was offering a substantial reward for their capture. "He won't give up easily," Thomas warned as they prepared to leave. "A man like that, his pride won't let him. We'll be careful," Reese promised. "Once we reach California, we can lose ourselves in one of the mining towns. New people arrive daily, 2 more won't raise eyebrows." Before departing, Nora entrusted Thomas with the letter she had written to her sister, along with a small additional note explaining what had happened. Thomas promised to send it with a trusted friend traveling to St. Louis the following month, who would then mail it from there to further obscure its origins. Their route took them through the Kansas Territory into Colorado. where the looming presence of the Rocky Mountains both intimidated and exhilarated Nora. They joined a wagon train for part of the journey, Reese posing as a hired guide while Nora presented herself as his new bride, a fiction that wasn't far from the truth in spirit, if not in law. The weeks on the trail transformed Nora in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her skin darkened from the sun, her hands grew calloused from work, her body strengthened from daily riding. The pampered merchant's wife from Independence gradually disappeared, replaced by a woman who could start a fire in the rain, help butcher game for dinner, and sleep soundly beneath the stars. "You're blossoming," Reese observed one evening as they sat beside their campfire, the wagon train settled for the night nearby. "Like a flower that's finally found sunlight after growing in shadow." "I feel more alive than I ever have," she admitted, leaning against his shoulder. "Even with all the uncertainty ahead, I wouldn't trade this freedom for any amount of security." "Nor would I," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Though I do look forward to the day when we can stop running and start building something permanent." That opportunity came sooner than expected. As they crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains into California in late autumn of 1850, they encountered a former cavalry officer named Colonel James Roberts, who was establishing a new settlement in a verdant valley to the north, a place he called New Hope. "I need good men and women," he told them over dinner at his camp. "People with grit, willing to work hard to build something worthwhile. The gold fields are drawing most settlers south, but there's richer opportunities in ranching and farming for those with patience." Reese and Nora exchanged a look, the same thought crossing both their minds. A new settlement meant new beginnings without the burden of explaining their past. "We might be interested," Reese said carefully, "though we should mention we're not officially married." The colonel waved a dismissive hand. "Half the couples in California have stories they'd rather not tell. New Hope is exactly what its name suggests, a fresh start. If you're willing to work and deal honestly with your neighbors, your past is your own business." 2 weeks later, they arrived in the valley where New Hope was taking shape. A dozen cabins had already been built, with more under construction. Fields had been cleared for spring planting, and herds of cattle grazed on the rolling hills surrounding the settlement. With the help of their new neighbors, Reese and Nora built a small cabin on the eastern edge of town. Reese's skill with horses quickly earned him a position overseeing the community's growing herd, while Nora, to her surprise, found herself teaching in the one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a church on Sundays. On Christmas Eve of 1850, as snow dusted the mountains surrounding their new home, Reese and Nora stood before the assembled residents of New Hope and spoke the marriage vows they had long carried in their hearts. The ceremony was simple, the celebration afterward joyous, and when they returned to their cabin that night, it was as husband and wife in truth as well as spirit. "I have something for you," Reese said, producing a small wooden box from beneath their bed. "I've been working on it in secret for weeks." Inside, Nora found a delicately carved wooden frame containing a sketch, a perfect rendering of the stream where they had met in Independence, complete with the fallen log and surrounding wildflowers. "So we never forget where our story began," Reese explained, his voice husky with emotion. "Even as we write new chapters." Tears filled Nora's eyes as she traced the careful lines of the drawing. "It's perfect," she whispered, "like everything that's brought us here." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. New Hope grew steadily, attracting families seeking a community built on mutual respect rather than rigid hierarchies. Reese established a successful horse breeding operation, his animals becoming known throughout Northern California for their strength and intelligence. Nora's small school expanded as the town did, eventually requiring a proper schoolhouse and additional teachers. In the spring of 1852, their first child was born, a son they named Daniel, after the foreman whose courage and loyalty had made their escape possible. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, whom they called Emily in honor of Nora's sister. It was shortly after Emily's birth that a letter arrived from Boston, the first communication from Nora's family since her disappearance. Her sister had received Nora's explanation, and after the initial shock, had understood her decision. Their parents had passed away, Emily wrote, never knowing their daughter was alive, a fact that brought Nora both grief and guilt. But Emily herself had married a kind man who supported her desire to maintain contact with her long-lost sister, albeit discreetly. "She wants to visit," Nora told Reese, her voice thick with emotion as she read the letter for the third time. "Next spring if we think it's safe." "Do you?" he asked, bouncing little Emily on his knee. "Victor might have given up the search by now, but if anyone connected to him learned your whereabouts." "It's been 4 years," Nora reasoned, "and she would come alone, using her married name. No one would connect her to me." After careful consideration, they agreed to the visit, and in May of 1855, Emily Foster, formerly Barrett, arrived in New Hope to meet her sister's family for the first time. The reunion was tearful and joyous, the bond between the sisters rekindling as if their separation had been mere weeks rather than years. "He searched for you for nearly a year," Emily confided one afternoon as they watched the children play in the meadow behind the house. "Victor, I mean. He was obsessed, convinced that Reese had kidnapped you against your will." "And now," Nora asked, her heart still constricting at the mention of her former husband's name, "he remarried last winter, a widow from Chicago with connections to the railroad industry." Emily took her sister's hand. "He's moved on, Nora. You're truly free now." The knowledge lifted a weight Nora hadn't realized she still carried. That night, as she and Reese lay in bed, she shared Emily's news. "We don't have to look over our shoulders anymore," she said, tracing the lines of his face in the moonlight. "We can simply live." Reese gathered her close, his embrace as secure and comforting as it had been from the first. "We've been living all along, my love, but I won't deny it's good to know the past is finally behind us." In the autumn of 1857, as New Hope celebrated its 7th anniversary, Colonel Roberts announced his retirement as the settlement's unofficial leader. To Reese and Nora's surprise, the town council unanimously elected Reese as his successor, a testament to the respect he had earned through years of fair dealing and hard work. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," he protested when Roberts informed him of the decision. "Leadership isn't about qualifications," the older man replied. "It's about character, and yours has been tested in ways few men could withstand." So it was that Reese Irwin, once a cowboy with little more than his horse and his integrity, became the administrative head of one of Northern California's most promising communities. Nora, meanwhile, continued her work at the school while also establishing a small lending library with books donated by residents and ordered from San Francisco. Their children grew strong and curious, Daniel inheriting his father's affinity for horses and open spaces, Emily showing her mother's love of literature and learning. A third child joined their family in 1859, another son, whom they named Thomas, a tribute to both Morgan's cousin who had helped them on their journey and to Nora's father. Life in New Hope wasn't without its difficulties. Droughts threatened crops, disputes between neighbors required mediation, and the growing tensions between North and South reached even their remote valley as the 1860s dawned. Yet through it all, Reese and Nora faced each challenge together, their partnership stronger for having been forged in adversity. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in New Hope, they hosted a celebration at their home, now a comfortable 2-story house overlooking the valley. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit, Reese stood on the porch steps and raised a glass to the assembled friends and neighbors. "A decade ago, Nora and I came here seeking refuge," he began, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "What we found instead was home. Not just a place to live, but a community that accepted us without question and supported us without condition. For that, we are eternally grateful." Cheers erupted from the crowd, glasses raised in response to his toast. When the noise subsided, he continued, his eyes finding Nora's in the gathering darkness. But tonight, I want to honor the woman whose courage made all of this possible. Who left behind everything she knew for an uncertain future with a cowboy who promised her nothing but freedom and his heart. He extended his hand, drawing Nora to his side. To my wife, my partner, my best friend who taught me that love isn't about possession, but about choice. Every day I choose you, Nora Irwin, and thank God that you continue to choose me. As their friends applauded and their children beamed with pride, Nora stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband, her heart as full as it had been that day by the stream when she first admitted her feelings for him. I would choose you 1,000 times over, she whispered against his lips. In this life and any other. Later that night, as they stood on their porch watching the last guests depart down the moonlit road, Reese wrapped his arms around Nora from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, "leaving everything behind?" The comforts, the security. Nora leaned back against his chest, her hands covering his where they rested at her waist. "Not for a single moment," she replied without hesitation. "What good is security without happiness? What value has comfort without love?" She turned in his embrace to face him. "You saved me, Reese, not by taking me away, but by showing me I had the strength to save myself." "We saved each other," he corrected gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face, still the same gesture after all these years. "And we'll keep on doing so every day for as long as we live." As they stood there beneath the vast canopy of stars, the same stars that had guided them across the continent a decade earlier, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a loveless marriage and clandestine meetings by a stream, to a home filled with love, children, and purpose, a life built on choice rather than obligation, on partnership rather than possession. It wasn't the life she had been raised to expect, nor the one society would have prescribed for her. It was something far better, a life authentically her own, shared with a man who had waited years for her freedom and who had proven with each passing day that the wait had been worthwhile. "I love you, Cowboy," she murmured, using the playful nickname that had emerged during their journey west. Reese's answering smile, as bright and genuine as the day they met, was all the response she needed. In it, she saw everything they had endured, and everything they had built, a testament to love's patient power and the enduring strength of two hearts that had found in each other not completion, but companionship on life's ever-unfolding trail. Together, hand in hand, they walked back into the home they had created, not a cage but a haven, not an obligation but a choice renewed with each sunrise. And in that choice, repeated day after day, year after year, they found the truest definition of freedom, the liberty to love wholly, honestly, and without reservation for all the days of their lives.